Well. Look who's back, bleeding ambition, dressed in silence. You thought they'd forget you, didn't you? You thought the world would move on while you hid in the shadows, counting your losses and burying your rage. But here you are, not reborn, reforged. They thought your disappearance was defeat, but every second you vanished, you were watching, calculating, observing the patterns of betrayal like a scientist studying disease. You learned their smiles were weapons, their kindness, camouflage, and their pity, the final insult. You're not the same creature they buried. You're the consequence of what they created. The silence they mocked has turned into your battlefield. And now, every breath you take echoes like a warning. You see, you weren't healing. You were loading. And every scar became ammunition. They should have known better. They should have never mistaken your silence for surrender. Because now, that silence speaks louder than thunder. And it whispers one thing: you're back. And this time, you're not leaving survivors. Betrayal. You don't forget it. You catalog it. You remember the laughter that turned into silence the moment you entered the room. You remember the handshakes that came with hidden knives, and the way they said your name. Soft, sweet, right before they used it like a weapon. They didn't stab you once. They carved lessons into your spine. Every lie a cut, every smirk a scalpel, until you stopped bleeding and started learning. You see, betrayal was never personal. It was practice. They trained you, unintentionally, in the art of endurance, in the science of silence, in the discipline of becoming dangerous. You watched them celebrate your collapse. You saw their faces light up like victory candles, and you said nothing. Because the smartest revenge isn't rage, it's record keeping. They thought they destroyed you, but all they did was teach you the blueprint of their kind. The tone they use before a lie, the tremor in their laughter when they're hiding guilt, the way loyalty sounds different when it's about to expire. You learn the taste of betrayal so well, you can smell it before it walks in. You can hear it in applause. You can see it in pity. You didn't just survive betrayal. You studied it. You dissected it until it confessed its secrets. And now, when someone says, "Trust me," you smile, because you've seen the anatomy of a snake and you know exactly where to cut. You didn't survive betrayal. You became its professor. Silence. It wasn't weakness. It was surveillance. While they laughed, you listened. While they shouted your name in mockery, you studied the tone of their voices. While they plotted, you wrote mental notes. Every smirk, every whisper, every twitch. Your silence became a laboratory. And pain, your greatest experiment. You watched patterns repeat. Egos inflate. Alliances decay. You realized chaos isn't random. It's rehearsed. Every betrayal follows a rhythm. Every downfall hums the same tune. And you learned the melody by heart. You didn't fight back. You recorded. You didn't react. You remember. You turned pain into data and patience into strategy. Every insult was archived. Every smirk was time-stamped. Every harmless joke was entered into the ledger of future consequences. You became the ghost in their system, the unseen variable in their equations. They talked about you in closed rooms, never realizing you were the silence sitting between their sentences. They thought you were gone. You were documenting their decay. They thought they had peace. You were watching the expiration date on their masks. You learned the world's cruelest secret, the one who says nothing, controls everything. And now, as they scramble, as they sense that something's coming but can't define what, they finally understand what your silence meant. You were never quiet. You were building thunder. They called you quiet. They never realized quiet people invent storms. You didn't seek revenge. You engineered it. Not by impulse, not by fire, by design. Think like an architect. What do architects do? They study foundations. They test weight. They plan collapse and rebuild. You did the same with people. Every slight became a measurement. Every betrayal, a material. You took pain and turned it into plans. You took shame and turned it into scaffolding. Patience wasn't empty time. It was surveillance dressed as calm. Your patience became their paranoia. They began to expect storms. They began to check locks they'd never thought to check. You shifted from victim to architect. You learned to value outcomes over outrage. You don't explode. You compute. You don't scream. You schedule. What did you build? Not noise, not chaos. A system, a ledger of debts, a map of weaknesses, a clock counting down. Every scar sent a signal. Every insult stored like fuel. What they thought was damage became leverage. You practiced the quiet math of consequence. You learned interest rates for pain. Compound it long enough, and the smallest debt eats kingdoms. You don't break anymore. You calculate the interest on pain. You rehearse the fatal move in 1,000 tiny acts, a withheld word, a conveniently timed presence, a revealing smile at the exact second. Not revenge for revenge's sake. Precision, outcome, proof. They sleep on the idea you're unpredictable. They fail to see you are inevitable. You sharpen patience into pressure. You turn silence into a spring that will unwind when the right pin is pulled. And now, the board is trembling. Because you are done observing. You are ready to move. Their peace is rotting. They feel it. The storm they once laughed at is circling back with receipts. The walls they built with your humiliation are starting to crack, and now they whisper your name like it's bad luck. You've become the rumor they can't disprove. The ghost that keeps showing up in their reflections. The silence that rearranges their comfort. They panic not because you're loud, but because you're precise. Every move you make has the patience of a god and the cruelty of karma wearing a tailored suit. They're choking on the same silence they once mocked. The same quiet they called weakness now feels like a curse. Their laughter sounds forced. Their alliances tremble. Their smiles don't reach their eyes anymore. And you don't even have to touch them. You just exist, and they start confessing in their heads. That's the beauty of poetic justice. You don't need to chase what's already collapsing. You didn't come back for revenge. You came back for balance, to let gravity pull masks off, to let guilt do the killing. Every lie they told now drips from their own lips like poison. Every secret they buried now claws its way up through their peace. They're not scared of you destroying them. They're terrified of you remembering them. And in that balance, where truth weighs heavier than mercy, every fake smile starts to shake. You didn't need to destroy them. You made them destroy themselves. You moved a piece, just one, a single decision placed with surgical patience. That tiny motion was a sentence. They read it wrong. They panicked. They unmasked. They confessed. They tripped over their own lies. You watched their empire of excuses turn to ash. You became what they feared most, predictable chaos. Not loud chaos, precise chaos, inevitable chaos. You learned to weaponize quiet. Your silence was not absence. It was accusation. It was evidence filed in the dark. Your next move wasn't violence. It was revelation. A ledger opened. Receipts fell like rain. Proof landed on clean desks. Names exposed themselves. Allegiances dissolved. Trust evaporated. Now their calendars are hollow. Meetings become audits. Promises taste like ash. They check mirrors for ghosts. Handshake feels like litigation. They count breaths like banknotes. The panic is precise. The fracture begins at the seam they sewed with lies. You offered them no story, only facts, only outcomes. You didn't scream. You showed what already existed. And when truth arrives, violence becomes redundant. Corruption collapses under its own weight. The board toppled because the pieces chose their own fate. You were the pressure point on the map. You were the last invoice they ignored. You were the silence they never learned to read. They thought your absence was an ending. It was the countdown. You didn't win. You evolved. They prayed you'd break. You built an empire instead. They buried your name. Now it's currency. You're not their enemy anymore. You're their evidence. Every time they speak of loyalty, your shadow corrects them. Every time they fake a smile, your silence audits it. You became the reminder that consequences don't knock. They arrive. You became the living receipt of every underestimated soul. So let them panic. Let them whisper. Because every time your name is mentioned, somewhere, a guilty soul remembers exactly what they did. You didn't return for vengeance. You returned for recognition. And they know it's fatal.